All right, so the first question on the review, x squared equals 25. We want to use the square root method to solve this because there's only one x. It's just x squared. So I take the square root of the left, the square root of the right, and x equals not just 5, but I'm taking a square root, so there's also a -5 answer. So my answers would be x equals 5 and x equals -5. Part B, x squared equals 196, square root the left, square root the right. So x equals what? Positive 14 and a -14. You could also write it like this, which is, there's nothing wrong with writing it that way. We just want to make sure that in the future we don't use that and make some mistakes. Part C, x squared equals 49 over 64. So I square root the left, square root the right. X equals, we'll do the plus minus on this one. The square root of the top is 7. The square root of the bottom is 8. So it's just positive -7/8. Now, if there's a little bit more going on, I have 5x squared equals 50. I still only have one x, so I'm just going to use my railroad tracks and get x alone. In this case, I have to divide by 5 first. So x squared equals 10. Now I can take the square root of the left and the right. So x equals a positive square root 10, and it also equals a negative square root of 10. I don't know what the square root of 10 is. It's not a nice number, so I'm just going to leave it as square root 10. If I were to put that in the class calculators, it's going to give me square root of 10 right back. Okay, part B, same thing. I've only got one x, so I'm just going to try to get it by itself by moving everything to the other side. So I'm going to minus 11 on both sides, and I get x squared equals 12. And when I take the square root of this one, when I plug square root of 12 in my calculator, I'm actually going to get, 2 root 3. But that's one of my answers. My other answer is -2 root 3. Because when I take a square root, I get 2 answers. Part C, a little bit more going on, but I still only have one x, just x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and add 180 to both sides. I'm trying to get the x by itself, so 7x squared equals 196. And then I'm going to divide by 7 on both sides. So x squared equals, let's see, 196 divided by 7 is going to be 28? 28, I think. Yeah, that looks right. So now when I take the square root of 28, put that in your calculator because you square root the left, square root the right. X equals, whoops, that's not an equals. X equals a positive and a negative. When I put this in my calculator, I'm going to get 2 root 7. Or you could say x equals 2 root 7 and x equals -2 root 7. All right, third set of problems. We're still solving using the square roots because I only have one x right there. So I'm going to do my railroad tracks. In this case, nothing else is on the outside of the parentheses, so I can go ahead and square root right now. So on the left, I have x plus 2, but on the right, I took the square root of 9. So I get a 3, but I also get a -3 answer. So I need to split these up into 2 different answers right now because I'm not done yet. I've got a -2 from both sides, which means I have to -2 from the 3, and I have to -2 from the -3. So my answers become 1 and -5. So in the previous questions, our answers were the same numbers, just one was positive, one was negative. But now, because there's other things inside the parenthesis after we square root, our answers aren't going to be the exact same number. So we've got to be careful. B here, we've got square root the left, square root the right. So 4x plus 3 is going to equal 9 and -9. So my next step is to minus 3 on the left. So I also have to minus 3 on the right from both of those answers. So now I get 4x equals 9 minus 3 is 6. Negative 9 minus 3 is negative 12. And to get x alone, I divide by 4, which means I have to divide both of those answers by 4. So x is going to equal 6 divided by 4 is 3/2. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. So my answers are 3/2 and x equals negative 3. Part C, yikes, this one is got a lot going. Inside and outside the parentheses. So let's start on the outside. Minus 14, minus 14. That is a minus and a 14, not a plus and a 4. Minus 14. So 2x minus 4 squared equals 3. Divide by 3, divide by 3. So 2x minus 4 squared equals 1. That's nice because when I square root the left and square root the right, 2x minus 4 equals the square root of 1 is 1. And my other answer is just going to be negative 1. So now to get x alone, I'm going to rewrite this over here. 2x minus 4 equals a 1 and a negative 1. I've got to add 4. So I have to add 4 up here, and I have to add 4 on the other one. So 2x equals, what do I have? A 5 and a negative, nope, negative 1 plus 4 is a positive 3. Sorry. So 5 and 3. Now I divide by 2. So I have to divide both of these answers by 2. So x equals 5/2 and 3/2. And I'm okay with that answer. I don't want decimals. I would rather you leave it as a fraction looking like that. Okay, solve quadratic equations by factoring. So now all of a sudden we have more than one x. If you notice, I have an x squared and a 3x. I have an x in this parenthesis and an x in this parenthesis. So I can't just use my square root method because I have more than one x. So on this first one, the goal of these problems is to make a big X, find what goes in my parentheses, set them equal to 0, and solve for each parenthesis. The nice thing is on these first couple examples, they've already set 2 parentheses for you. I already know what my parentheses are, so all I have to do is x plus 3 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. Because if I multiply them together and I want to get 0, one of them has to be 0. So if I minus 3 on this one, x equals negative 3 is one answer. And if I add 2 on both sides for this one, x equals positive 2. All right, let's do that again on part B. I have 2 parentheses multiplying to 0. That means one of them can be 0. So 2x minus 5 could be 0, or x plus 8 could be 0. So on this one, I'm going to add 5. So 2x equals 5, divide by 2. X equals 5/2. That's one answer. On the other one, I just have to minus 8 from both sides. So x equals negative 8. That would be my second answer. That would be my other answer. Now, C doesn't give me the parentheses. I have to come up with the parentheses myself. I have 2 x's, so I know I can't do the square root method, so I'm going to try the big X method. And on top, I put a 2. On the bottom, I put a 3, and I want to know what multiplies to be 2 and adds up to 3. Well, that's easy, 2 and 1. So my parentheses are x plus 2 and x plus 1. Those multiply together to be 0, right? So that means one of them has to be 0. So x plus 2 could be 0, or x plus 1 could be 0. So if I solve both of these, x is either negative 2, or if I minus 1 from both sides, x is negative 1. And some of you have started to notice the shortcut. You've started to notice the relationship between the big X and your little x answers. If you've noticed that shortcut, by all means, keep using it. I'm okay with that. So let's do a few more factoring ones. X squared plus 4x minus 77. So I know I've got a big X. Negative 77 on top, 4 on the bottom. So I'm looking for things that multiply to be 77. I'm guessing it's going to be 7 and 11, but one of them is negative, and we want it to be the 7 because we want them to add up to a positive 4. So x minus 7 multiplied by x plus 11 equals 0. So x minus 7 equals 0, or x plus 11 equals 0. So when I railroad track, x equals 7, or when I minus 11 from both sides, x equals negative 11. And again, if you are noticing the correlation between your big X numbers and your little x answers, you can go ahead and make that shortcut. All right, 3x squared minus 21x equals negative 30. Well, first of all, it has to equal 0 before I can big X. So let's add 30 to both sides. So 3x squared minus 21x plus 30 equals 0. Now, before I big X, 3 goes into all of these. So I'm going to factor out a 3. So 3 leaves me an x squared. Negative 21 divided by 3 is negative 7x. 30 divided by 3 is 10. And now that multiplies to be 0. The nice thing about doing this, factoring out that 3, is I can make that 3 go away. Because if I railroad track right now, if I divide the left by 3, that goes away. But I have to divide the right-hand side by 3. Well, 0 divided by 3 is just 0. So I still have a 0 on the right. But look at how much easier my problem is now. X squared minus 7x plus 10 equals 0. So now when I big X, I'm going to put 10 on top and negative 7 on the bottom. So that's going to be negative 5 and negative 2, right? Those multiply to be 10, and they add up to be negative 7. So my parentheses are x minus 5, x minus 2, multiplied to be 0. So that means that either x minus 5 is 0, or x minus 2 is 0. So when I railroad track, x equals 5, or add 2 to both sides, x equals 2. And again, there's a correlation. Negative 5, positive 5. Negative 2, positive 2. I don't mind if you use that shortcut, but just make sure you understand what's really going on when you use it, so you don't use it the wrong way. All right, part C, I don't have it equal to 0, so I have to minus 6x from both sides. So I end up with 7x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals 0. Nothing goes into 7, 6, and 16. So let's do 7 times 16, rude. What is that? 112. Oh, it's a negative 16, so negative 112. And negative 6 on the bottom. So I'm looking for things that multiply to 112, but they have to add up to be 6. So if I start my list, 1 and 112, 2 and 56, still too far apart, 3 and 34, no, 34 is not going to be big enough. 3 and, I don't think 3 is going to work. 3 is not going to work, so don't do 3. Erase 3. Come on, get out of here. 4 and 28. We're getting closer. 5 isn't going to work. 6 is not going to work. 7 is going to work. 7 and, let's see, it goes into 70 10 times, and then I need another 42. So 16. Well, that gets me closer. I'm still not quite there. But at least we're on the right track. How about 8 and 14? 8 and 14, I think that's the one that I want right there. So positive 8, positive 14. Maybe I should have found those numbers before we recorded the video, right? We want them to add up to a negative 6. So the negative is going to go with the 14. But I had to multiply by a 7 in the first step. So please remember to divide by 7. And this side becomes negative 2. And this side stays negative 8/7. So my parentheses, if I don't recognize the shortcut yet, I'm going to have 7x plus 8 and x minus 2 equals 0. So that means 7x plus 8 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. So when I railroad track this side, x equals 2, or, that's one of my answers, 7x equals negative 8, divide by 7, so x equals negative 8/7 would be my other answer. And again, hopefully you're starting to notice the shortcut that's helping you find your x answers a little bit faster. All right, we need more room. I kind of covered up some of our problems down here, so I'm going to erase a few things just to give us more room for these problems. 2x squared plus 27x plus 36. Nothing goes into all of those. So 2 times 36, my big X is going to be 72 on top, 27 on the bottom, which is 24 times 3. But I multiplied by 2 to begin with, so I have to divide by 2, divide by 2. This side, that's nice, that just becomes 12. The right side stays as 3/2. So x plus 12 and 2x plus 3. Some of you already know the answers, and I'm okay with that. So x plus 12 equals 0, or 2x plus 3 equals 0. So when I railroad track, x equals negative 12. This side, I'm minus 3, 2x equals negative 3. Divide by 2, x equals negative 3/2. Now, I know I'm going through these railroad tracks kind of fast, and I'm okay with that. Guys, we have been doing this for years now, and I'm not going to take a lot of time going through the simple railroad tracks. If you need to pause the video and work through those, please do so. But I do realize I'm going fast, and I'm doing that on purpose because you don't want to sit through a 7-hour video if you don't have to. So part B, I like this one. There's lots of x's, but right now this x squared is by itself. So let's move it to the other side. Let's do the railroad track thing, and let's minus 1x squared from the right and minus 1x squared from the left. So I get 4x squared plus 9x equals 0. Now, you have two options. One of those options is to go ahead and do your big X. And when I look for my constant, for my number that goes on top, I don't have one. There isn't a number that goes on top. And that's going to create some problems. So what I do know is right here, I've got an X in both of these terms. So remember how we could factor that X out? We've done a few examples like this. I still have two things that multiply to be 0, but one of them isn't a parenthesis anymore, and that's okay. X can be 0 right there. That was easy. And then 4x plus 9 can equal 0. So when I railroad track and minus 9, and I get 4x equals negative 9, and I divide by 4, then x can equal negative 9/4. That is my other answer. So not everything necessarily turns into a big X because you're factoring. Sometimes you're factoring, you can just move an X out like that. Not as often, but it can happen. So there's your example of it happening. Okay, lots of stuff to get together. I'm going to minus 1x squared from the left, so I have to minus 1x squared from the right. I'm going to minus 3x on the left, so I have to minus 3x on the right. And I have to minus 5 on the left and minus 5 on the right. I know this is going to bug some of you. You want to move everything to the left. But the reason I'm moving it all to the right is I want to end up with a positive x squared. Okay, the x method doesn't work if I have a negative x squared. So I moved everything to the right on purpose so that my 3x squared was a positive 3x squared. So now when I do my big X, I'm going to do 3 times 45, which is what? 135 on top. And I'm going to get negative 32 on the bottom. So I need two things that multiply to be 135 and add up to 32. So 1 and 1, 35. 5 and 27? There are my numbers right there. Those are the ones that I want. So 5 and 27, but they both have to be negatives. So I need to put a negative with both of them. And to get 135, I took the 3 and multiplied it by 45. So I have to divide by 3. So this side becomes negative 9. And this side is negative 5/3. So if you haven't noticed the shortcut yet, 3x minus 5, x minus 9 equals 0. So 3x minus 5 is equal to 0, or x minus 9 is equal to 0. So when I railroad track, I get x equals 5/3, or x equals positive 9. And again, those numbers are not an accident. That relationship is not an accident. That pattern keeps happening over and over again. Okay, fun ones now. Quadratic formula. We like the quadratic formula because it works all the time. So we start by saying A is equal to 1, B is equal to 5, and C is equal to 5. And then I plug those in. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times C, which is 5, all divided by 2 times A, which is 1. So we're going to kind of write on top of other questions as we do these ones. That simplifies. Remember, I simplify this part. I want to simplify the inside of the root, and I want to simplify the bottom. So negative 5 plus or minus the square root. I plug the bottom into my calculator, and I get 25 minus 20. So that just becomes 5, all divided by 2. Now, if I were to plug this into my calculator, square root of 5 is not a nice number. And it doesn't simplify at all. It stays square root 5. The 2 on the bottom doesn't reduce anywhere. So this is actually, that's as simplified as I can get. I cannot make that look any cleaner than it looks right there. So that's where I would stop. Negative 5 plus minus square root 5 over 2. All right, let's look at B. A is equal to 1. B is equal to 7. C is equal to 5. Remember, that right there is a part of your points on your test. I want you to write A equals B equals C equals. Then I want you to plug them in. Negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A, which is 1. I should probably put X equals at the front, since I'm the math teacher and I'm supposed to follow the rules. Then I'm looking for what simplifies. This piece, and this piece. I want to clean those up. So X equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root. That's going to be 49 minus 20. So that's going to be 29, all divided by 2. And again, the square root of 29 does not get any nicer. 2 doesn't divide anything. So that would be my final answer. It does not reduce any more than that. If you were to plug negative 7 plus root 29 over 2 in the calculator on the wall, it's going to spit back root 29 minus 7 over 2, which is exactly the same thing. So it doesn't simplify, which means I'm done. All right, C. A equals 1, B equals 9, C equals 7. So negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A, X equals, So when I clean this up, again, I'm going to clean up this part, the inside of the square root, not the entire square root, just the inside. X equals negative 9 plus or minus square root. When I plug that in, What is that? 81 minus 28, so 53, divided by 2. Square root of 53 is not going to clean up. 2 doesn't divide anything, so again, that would be my final answer. Okay, let's try a few that we can clean up a little bit more at the end. So A down here, my little a is going to be 1, my B is going to be negative 10, and my C is going to be 1. Remember, I'm getting those numbers right here. So when I plug that into my quadratic equation, x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root negative 10 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 1. All of that is divided by 2 times 1. All right, clean up what we can. This part, the inside part, and the bottom. So x equals 10 plus or minus the square root. Negative 10 squared is 100. Minus 4 is going to be 96. And all of that is going to be divided by 2. Does that seem right? Yeah, that looks right to me. All right, so next step is you are going to plug this into your calculator, the square root of 96, and it's going to spit back. It should be, what, 4 root 6? That looks right. 4 root 6, all divided by 2. And now I just clean up my division. 10 divided by 2 is 5, plus or minus 4 root 6 divided by 2. Well, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and then I'm left with a root 6. So 5 plus or minus 2 root 6 would be my final answer. So those ones definitely clean up a lot more than the ones on the last part. So let's give ourselves some room for part B. So for part B, we're doing this one now. A is going to equal 2, B is going to equal 9, C is going to equal negative 9. So x equals negative 9 plus or minus square root negative, not negative 9. 9, B is positive, 9 squared minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is negative 9, all divided by 2 times 2. So now I want to clean up this part, the inside of my root, and the front, or the bottom, sorry. So x equals negative 9 plus or minus the square root. 9 squared is 81. 9 times 6 is 54. Is that going to be 9 times 6? No, that's 9 times 8. So we get 81 plus 8 times 9. Yeah, so 81 plus 72. Nice. So 153, all divided by 4. You guys ought to just plug that in your calculator. You don't need to try and go through that whole big mess in your head. There's no reason to do that. Then I plug this part in my calculator, square root of 153, and you should, let's see, negative 9 plus minus. When you plug that in your calculator, I think you are going to get, because that's 9 times 17. So the 9 will come out. You get 3 root 17, and all of that is divided by 4. 4 doesn't go into any of those numbers, so that right there is going to be my final answer for the second one. Okay. All right. Moving on to C. 3x squared minus 12x minus 13. So A equals 3, B equals negative 12, C equals negative 13. So x equals negative 12 plus or minus square root negative 12 squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A, which is 3. All right, so that looks like a little bit of a mess. Let's clean things up. Negative 12, the 2 times 3 on the bottom, and then this mess on the inside. Now, I don't expect you to be able to do that in your head, right? I mean, the negative 12, most of you can say, hey, x equals, wow, what am I writing? X equals positive 12. Most of you can do that part. Most of you can even do 2 times 3 and get 6. But if you can't do negative 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 13, if you can't do that in your head, then don't do it in your head. There's no reason to. Yeah, we don't need to do that in our head. So go ahead, plug that in the calculator, and you are going to get, I don't even want to do that in my head. So what was it? Negative 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 13. So all I'm going to do, if I'm plugging this in so I make sure I do it right, I'm going to put a parenthesis, and I'm going to put negative 12, parenthesis, squared, minus 4, parenthesis, I don't remember what A was. A was 3, right? Let's go back. A was 3, C is negative 13. Okay. A was 3, C was negative 13. Close 300. All right, that's nice. Square root 300. Then you go back to your calculator again and you put in the square root of 300, and it's going to kick you back something like, let's see, we'll have 12 plus or minus the square root of 300 is going to be, what, 10 root 3, because it's just 100 times 3, all over 6. But this time, things simplify a little bit, right? In fact, they simplify separately. So 12 over 6, that part right here, 12 divided by 6, that becomes 2, plus or minus. But 10 divided by 6, this part, 10 divided by 6 becomes 5 over 3. And then I end up with a root 3. So you could write it that way. You could separate them. Or you could just divide everything by 2 and leave it written in that form. But I like this one. I think this is the cleanest one we got. Okay, next section, more quadratic formulas. X squared plus 16x plus 13 equals 1. So this one, I just have to minus 1 from both sides. So I get x squared plus 16x plus 12 equals 0. So my A is 1, my B is 16, and my C is 12. So x equals negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 16 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 12, all divided by 2 times 1. So when I simplify this part and this part and this part, what do I get? X equals negative 16 plus minus the square root. 16 squared minus 4 times 1 times 12. So I'm going to go to my calculator, and I'm going to put 16 squared minus 4 times 1 times 12. I think it was 12. 208. Was it 12? It was 12. So that becomes a 208, and all of that is going to be divided by 2. Now remember, on the test, this part right here gets you points. This part right here gets you points. It's not all about the final answer. I want to see your work along the way, okay? Now this piece right here, we're going to go ahead and plug in the calculator off the back wall. And when you do so, what do you get? Square root 208 gives us 4 root 13. So I'm going to rewrite x equals negative 16 plus or minus 4 root 13, all divided by 2. Now this is nice because, hey, 16 divides by 2, and so does 4. So negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. Plus minus 4 divided by 2 is just 2. So I get 2 root 13. So negative 8 plus minus 2 root 13 is a beautiful answer, and I would leave it just like that. Okay. B, we're going to do this one now. This one right here in the middle. So in order to do this one, I'm going to have to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to minus x from right there, and then I'm going to minus 34 from both sides. So I end up with x squared. Let's erase some of this. X squared, 3x minus x is 2x, and then I have a minus 34 equals 0. So a equals 1, b equals 2, and c equals negative 34. So when I plug those into my quadratic formula, I get x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 34, all divided by 2 times a. Then I want to simplify this piece, and the bottom. And when I do so, I get negative 2 plus or minus the square root. 2 squared, when you plug that in, what are you going to get? 4 plus, all of that's going to come out to be 140. So square root 140, all divided by 2. And the square root of 140 becomes 2 root 35. So I end up with negative 2 plus or minus 2 root 35, all divided by 2, which is nice because negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. 2 divided by 2 is just 1, so I end up with square root 35. Okay, our video is starting to run a little bit long, so I'm actually not doing part C on the video. If you have a question about part C, come see me in class. I'm okay in person. I'm not that scary. Now, last couple sections. Square root of negative 125. Remember, not real is no longer an option. All I have to do is take the square root of positive 25, and then I have to add an I to the answer. Well, the square root of positive 25, that's easy, that's 5. So my answer becomes 5i. The negative, all you have to do is turn it into an I, and then you treat everything else like it's a positive. Okay, square root of 88 is going to, if you put that in your calculator, I think you'll end up with 2 root 22. But it's not a positive square root of 88. It's a negative 88. So I have to add an I to my answer. I can't just leave it 2 root 22. I can treat it like a positive when I plug it in my calculator. Because in my calculator, I'm just going to put square root 88, and it's going to tell me 2 root 22. But if I plug in square root negative 88, it's going to tell me domain error. We don't want that. So go ahead, plug it in as a positive, and then add an I to your answer. Okay, square root of 125. So again, I'm going to do 6, and in my calculator, I'm going to do a positive 125. I'm not going to do a negative 125. I'm going to treat it as if it was a positive. I know it's not, but we're going to pretend like it is. And my calculator is going to come back and tell me 30 root 5, but it was a negative, so I have to add an I to my answer. I can't just leave it a negative. I can't just leave it a positive. I have to put an I with my answer. Okay? All right, simplifying. Remember, i's are just like x's. So 4i plus 15i is just 19i. Ta-da! Done with that one. But when I multiply them together, 7 times 10 multiplies to be 70. I times I becomes I squared. And we learned that I squared is actually a number. It's negative 1. So this becomes 70 multiplied by negative 1, which becomes negative 70. Okay, for part C, I have to FOIL. I have to do 3 times 4, which is 12. Then I have to do 3 times 7i, which is 21i. Then I do negative 6 times 4, which is negative 24i. and negative 6i times 7i is negative 42i squared. Well, I remember something. I squared is negative 1. So that I squared takes this whole thing right here and turns it into a positive 42. And now I can add that with my 12, and I get 54. And then my 21i and my negative 24i become negative 3i. So my answer simplifies to be another complex number. Okay, last three. Quadratic formula, but we're going to have complex solutions. That means we are going to have I in our answers. Okay, so for A, x squared plus 36 equals 0. So A is going to equal 1. B, I actually don't have a B. There's no x value. So B is going to be 0 and C is going to be 36. So when I plug this into the quadratic formula, x equals negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times 36, all divided by 2 times 1. So this time when I simplify these pieces right here, what I get is x equals 0 plus or minus the square root. Let's see, negative 4 times 1 times 36 is going to be negative 144, all divided by 2. So now I want to plug this in my calculator, but I don't want to leave the negative. I want to plug it in with a positive 144, and it's going to give me back 12. But I can't pretend there wasn't a negative there. I have to put an I to replace that negative under the square root. And all of that is divided by 2, which means I have a positive negative 12 divided by 2, whoa, is 6i. So x equals, whoops, forgot my x equals part. X equals a positive and a negative 6i. Okay, let's do part B down here. Get rid of this mess. Nope, don't copy. Cut. Go away. Nope, don't duplicate. Buttons are hard. There we go. Okay, so A is 1, B is negative 8, and C is 17. So x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times C, all divided by 2 times 1. So now I want to simplify this piece, the inside piece, and the bottom. And when I do that, x equals 8 plus or minus the square root. It's going to be something negative. So let's do, what is it? Plug it in your calculator and you get, I'll tell you what you get because I'm plugging it in my calculator. You get negative 4, all divided by 2. So I need to simplify this part, but I can't take the square root of a negative, so I pretend it's a positive. And I get 8 plus or minus the square root of positive 4 is 2. But it wasn't a positive, it was a negative, so I have to add an I to my answer. All divided by 2, which is nice because that means, well, 8 divided by 2, that's just 4, plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is 1 I, so I just get 4 plus or minus I as my answer for that one. Okay, let's do one more example, and then you will be ready for the test, right? Ready to go. So A equals 1. We're doing C now. This is for C. A equals 1, B equals 4, C equals 7. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times, there's a lot of 4s in this one, A, which is 1, C, which is 7, all divided by 2 times A, which is 1. So I want to simplify this piece, and this piece. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus. I know the bottom's going to be a 2, and I'm going to have a square root of something. So 4 squared, that's 16, minus 4 times 7, that's 28. So that's going to be negative 12. So I'm going to plug this in my calculator without the negative. I'm going to plug a positive square root 12. And I'm going to get back, well, let's rewrite this part first. Negative 4 plus or minus. When I plug a square root of 12, I'm going to get 2 root 3. But it's a negative 12, so don't forget to add the I. And then everything's divided by 2, which means negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So those actually just cancel out, and I get square root 3 times by an I.